So welcome back again to ELT in Chile, a podcast about teaching English in Chile. So in this space, Kevin and I talk to teacher trainers, and experts who would like to share their experiences and expertise regarding English language teaching, not only in Chile, but also around the world. So we're really thrilled to announce that the relaunch of our podcast. After a short break, we're back with fresh ideas, exciting topics, and a renewed commitment to bringing you valuable content. This new chapter in our history will feature engaging conversations, expert insights, and a deeper dive into the themes that you love. As you can see in the screen, we can see Dr. Kevin Frangeric, who will be joining us in the podcast from now on. So thank you, Kevin, for accepting my invitation. So we're going to have fun. Right?
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So Dr. Kevin Frangeric is an early career researcher and experienced lecturer in linguistics, focusing on both critical discourse analysis and English as a foreign language teaching. He's a research associate at Lancaster and Aston University's Class Research Center, and right now a visiting professor at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile, where he's working with me. So he's having lots of fun, I guess. His most recent work includes the development of an L2 learner corpus in Latin America and a corpus of documents from the field of adult and child safeguarding in the UK. Moreover, Kevin is working on the integration of critical approaches to discourse analysis and data-driven learning, DDL, in pre-service education in the Global South. So Kevin.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Jose. And I'm very happy to announce this episode's guest, Dr. Evelin Nikolova from Lancaster University. And with her, we will be talking about English for academic purposes and international students in higher education contexts in the United Kingdom. Evelyn, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And let me just briefly introduce you. So Dr. Evelin Nikolova is an early career researcher in linguistics whose work spans the intersections of language, gender and sexuality, language and social justice, and the construction of identities and communication of ideologies in digitally mediated contexts. Her research is grounded in critical discourse studies, narrative analysis, and sociology. Dr. Nikolova has a sustained record of publication and presentations to both academic and non-academic audiences, as well as extensive teaching experience at undergraduate and postgraduate levels in the Department of Linguistics and English Language at Lancaster University. She also serves as an external supervisor for the Masters in TESOL at Durham University. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Nikolova coordinates English for academic purposes, EAP programs, 2 pre-sessional English courses, which include 5-week online and 4-week in-person options, and the Study Start program, a 2-week course designed to help students prepare for academic life. Through these programs, she supports students in developing their academic communication skills. She has also contributed to curricular creation, assessment development, and instructional design, with a strong emphasis on enhancing education accessibility through technology. So this all sounds super interesting. Thank you very much, Evelyn, for joining us here.
Thank you.
And also to talk about your experience in the area of English for academic purposes in the UK. So this field is certainly an important area of research and teaching, and especially for students with a non-English speaking background who come to the UK or any other English speaking country to do a degree in higher education. So could you, for our audience, just briefly explain what English for academic purposes, or EAP, entails exactly? What does it mean, and what are the main pillars of this concept?
Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a great pleasure to be here and be able to share what we do here at Lancaster University with colleagues in Chile, but also across the globe, as I believe many people are following your podcasts. So starting with English for academic purposes, as you said, EAP in short, it is a specialized branch of English language teaching that focuses on preparing students for studying at the higher education environment. It is not about improving language proficiency per se, but as I said, it's about equipping students with the skills that they are going to need to succeed in higher education. So starting with the main pillars, I believe it's important to begin with academic communication skills that pertain to reading, of course, writing, speaking, and listening. So starting with reading, for instance, students learn how to approach academic texts, identify key arguments, critically evaluate evidence. Writing, for example, focuses on mastering academic conventions when it comes to structuring an essay, using a formal language, referencing sources, and so on. But speaking and listening are also equally important because students will need to attend seminars, they will have to deliver presentations, understand lectures, being able to follow them, and so on. Now, another crucial pillar of EAP is definitely critical thinking and analysis. And this involves teaching students to move beyond simply accepting information, but to engage with it critically. So students might compare two articles in order to identify whether there are strengths and weaknesses in the arguments presented. They will also have to synthesize ideas from multiple sources to create cohesive arguments and so on. Then another crucial pillar of EAP is definitely the new cultural and academic conventions. So we do help students navigate, let's say, the often unwritten rules of academic life. So this includes understanding, for instance, the importance of referencing your sources to avoid plagiarism, engaging in academic debates, and so on. So this is a very, very important part of EAP. And perhaps it is also important to mention that the materials we create are tailored. So depending on the discipline of the students, on their prior academic experience, the materials have to be targeted. So for instance, a student who is going to do an engineering degree would be very different from a student who is going to go to the linguistics department, for instance, because the former might need more support when it comes to writing a report, while the latter might need more skills related to how to structure an essay, for instance. And also whether the students are undergraduate or postgraduate will also kind of influence the materials that we create. We have to take into account what their prior knowledge is. So in short, EAP is not just about improving your language proficiency, but it has to do with equipping you with the skills that are required in this academic environment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think maybe this sounds like a really interesting part of your job, but probably you face some challenges, for example, if students go to different programs. So, Evelyn, what are the main challenges that you have faced with international students in the UK? And how do you think you have contributed to overcome these challenges?
Thank you very much for the question. So obviously students come from very different cultural and academic backgrounds, and then there are several challenges that they would face with regarding to the academic norms and expectations. So for example, some of the students might come from environments where, say, rote learning is appreciated more, or they do not really have not learned how to question, for example, authority, while in the UK, critical thinking and independent analysis are prioritized and highly valued. So one of the initial challenges is to help students overcome this cultural shock and ease them to the new academic environment. So what we first try to do is we focus on creating this safe and supportive space where they feel comfortable expressing their ideas and also asking questions without feeling that they are judged. So this might include, in terms of materials, for instance, ice-breaking activities, but also discussions about these cultural differences are very important, where they can explicitly ask, but also address these new expectations and also the expectations in their institutions back home. So to really see how they are similar but also different. And then teaching critical thinking, I believe, is another significant challenge. So encouraging students to question authority, as I said, because some of them have not really learned how to do that. So to address this, we first try to include some scaffolded tasks, starting with critiquing examples from the literature rather than their own work. And gradually, I would say students become more comfortable questioning the sources, constructing their own arguments. But here, it is very important to emphasize that critical thinking is about engagement and dialogue. It is not about confrontation. So we really try to get this message across to students. And now, I think I'll have to mention this, that one of the growing challenges is actually incorporating AI tools effectively into the curricula. Now, why is this a challenge? It is because students might be very quick to embrace AI tools, but then they often lack the criticality needed to evaluate the information and the quality and the relevance of this, of the materials they get from the AI tools. So AI tools like ChatGPT, for instance, can generate essays and summaries, but students may not always know whether this information is accurate, relevant, or even aligned with academic standards. So this can lead sometimes to over-reliance on the AI tools. Now, to address this, what we did this last year, and obviously this is work in progress because several journal articles and books are being published on the topic. So what we did try to do this past year, we included materials to raise awareness. So literature on the topic, what has been written about AI, what the limitations of AI are, critical reasoning, ethical usage of AI. And then we also try to help students develop the skills they need in order to use AI to support them for brainstorming, for editing, for learning new concepts, finding literature, and so on. And then it is very, very important, and something we try to do as well was to talk about the ethical use of AI. So one way we did this was we engaged students with actually using AI tools during seminars, for example, where together with their tutors, they had to produce certain texts, but then they had to identify perhaps limitations in these texts and also experiment a bit with the tool. So this is what we have been doing. But as I said, this is work in progress. What we try is to kind of strike a balance between, yes, using the AI, it's not evil, but at the same time, you need the skills to actually critically evaluate what the tools can give you.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, well, thank you very much. This was super interesting. Just one thing that popped up in my head as I was listening to you is, how do you think AI or the use of AI may influence criticality in the students?
So I do believe, as I said, that we shouldn't see AI as something evil. Once you learn how to use the tool with as with several other tools in the past, you can use it to actually maximize your potential. So criticality obviously requires time to develop. But this doesn't mean that you cannot have the tool to support this. You can use the tool to find sources and then use, for example, the tool to give you a summary of the sources you have found. And again, you will have to check whether these summaries are correct. But it can help you save time, for instance. So there are several advantages to using the AI, but students have to know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And these guidelines are currently being developed across universities in the UK. And I don't think that there is, we have a unified, let's say, we have an agreement on what exactly is acceptable and what not. But I think we are moving towards a very good direction right now where, as I said, because of the research, we have a better picture of what we can use it for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. And talking about the challenges and solutions, how does the multicultural context and the different educational backgrounds that you addressed before of EAP students, how does that influence materials design? and what's the main focus of EAP materials? You kind of touched upon this before, but my question is more aimed at how does EAP materials, how do they differ from EFL, English as a foreign language materials?
Thank you, Kevin. So this multicultural context and like diverse educational backgrounds of EAP students, yes, they present challenges when it comes to material design, but I think they also offer us like rich opportunities to create a dynamic environment. So when I create materials, I often draw from my own experience as an international student. I came to the UK from Greece, so I was exposed to a very different system. So what I and my team try to do is prioritize inclusivity and accessibility in the material design. So we do try to include examples that are going to be relevant to the different students that we have. And Lancaster University is an international university, and they should really be reflected in the materials we use, but they also have to be accessible. Then another thing that is equally important is we try to include materials that will allow students to collaborate and learn from each other, because they do have a lot of knowledge that they can build upon for these new skills that they have to develop. And then including reflective practice in the materials is something also we try to do, both in the student materials, but also with our tutors. So as I said, we build on their knowledge, but we also ask them to reflect on what they have learned, to be aware of what they still need to do. So when it comes to students, we have something that we call the learning journey, and where students, I can see you both nodding, so this is something that many teachers are using. So we ask students to go to their learning journeys and write down what they feel comfortable with, basically reflect on what they have learned and evaluate to what extent they feel comfortable with the different materials. So this is something that we do with the materials. Now, the difference, how they differ EAP from EFL materials, well, in several ways, because the purpose, first of all, is very different. With EFL, we focus on general language acquisition, but with EAP, as I hope is clear now, we focus on tailoring materials for the success of students in academic contexts. So the emphasis is on the skills required for these contexts, like critical reading and so on, and also discipline-specific vocabulary. Then we use, in EAP, we try to use materials that are relevant to this context. So journal articles, we use authentic journal articles. When it comes to lecture, students attend lectures when they do the EAP, and they are asked to take notes, practice note-taking, listening, and they are introduced to all the different strategies that they need to use while attending this different contexts and exposure to lectures and so on. And then the skills are also different, because with EAP, yes, we do, students do improve their language proficiency, but this is integrated with higher order skills like critical thinking and analysis and synthesis and so on. So it is not just about improving their language proficiency, but there is something I also feel important to mention here. I do believe, and I think it's not just me, but many colleagues who are doing EAP, that EAP is would be helpful not just to international students, but also to students whose first language is English, because they still they still need to develop the same skills that international students develop. All this synthesis, critical thinking is very important for the higher education. And there are several students who say are born in the UK, but they still face challenges when they enter university. So I do think the EAP can be helpful to everyone, really, not just international students.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's something that happens here in Chile as well. I mean, Chile, our first language is Spanish, and many people would say that that they need to learn, for example, English and also academic English for academic purposes. So it's like or also maybe to become good teachers and also to become translators. So they're learning like different set of skills at the same time, and many people would say that no, because maybe English is their first language, but here we're talking about like the specific skills, like to be successful academically, right? And Evelyn,
but this also reminds me of This also reminds me of literacy. Like general academic literacy seems to be playing a big role in EAP.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, you're absolutely right there, okay.
Absolutely, and let's say, and following that train of thought, Evelyn, would you say, like in general, like in your experience, would you say that EAP is more difficult than English as a foreign language, or like to develop these skills? Like, what's your experience regarding this, like the difficulty?
I think that's a difficult question, or a tricky, perhaps, question.
Now you've got the opportunity to upset a lot of English teachers if you want to.
I wouldn't necessarily say that EAP is more difficult than EFL. I would say that they are different and they have very distinct goals and also very different challenges. And each requires a tailored approach to teaching. I have also been a teacher for several years before becoming an EAP designer and tutor. So I think, as I said, EAP, yes, is more specialized, is about helping students to succeed in this new environment in an academic setting. And for this, the materials have to focus on the skills required for this setting. And we do try to include them in the materials. On the other hand, EFL is about improving the proficiency of the English proficiency. So the difference really lies in the context and their goals. And say a student is learning English, they might be struggling with having a informal conversation with a colleague, a friend. But then somebody who's learning EAP might be struggling with presenting in front of an audience. So they are both struggling. The approach to helping them and the materials to help them are different. So they have their own challenges, and teachers and coordinators like myself have to take those into account when they work with students. I don't know if this answers your question.
Absolutely.
No, I think this was a good answer. Well, a good answer. It was a very insightful answer indeed. And you touched upon materials a little bit and on the individualistic nature, like each student is at a different level of English proficiency.
Yeah.
You may have a cohort of students who study very different subjects or are going to study very different subjects. So I think this warrants for a rather customized approach to materials design, right? And also to study at a particular university. I may imagine that Lancaster University do things slightly different than other universities in the UK, and vice versa. So my question here would be, what advice can you give fellow EAP teachers and course coordinators when it comes to preparing the materials in relation to the 4 skills, which you said are not the main focus? I get this, but you still need to tap into the 4 skills. How can you make this work? This seems to be a rather messy and quite complicated thing to do. What advice can you give, basically?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Kevin. So I believe that it is really important to, when creating materials for EAP students, is to put yourself in the student's shoes And what I mean by that, the first thing I would do is to research where they come from. So to understand basically the academic and cultural context that students are coming from is really, really important in order to have a better understanding of their expectations, for instance, but also their knowledge. But then you also said this already, Kevin. Different universities in the UK. Yes, it's UK higher education system, but then each university approaches certain things differently. So the second step for me would be to actually research the university that you're working at and to have a very good understanding of what the university asks students to do in the different departments. Of course, you cannot know everything, but for instance, having a knowledge of how the library works would then be very valuable in helping students, showing them where to find the resources they need, and so on. And then, since I said the resources, when I first came to the UK to do my MA, I really didn't know because I came from Greece, and then the resources available to students are very, very different and more limited. So something that I have tried to include in materials, but also in when I meet students, is to guide them through the resources available at Lancaster, because at Lancaster, for instance, there is the Writing Center, which is a very valuable space, I believe, for all our students, because yes, they go to their degrees, they have their lectures, they have different assignments to do, but and if they find something challenging, they can always go to the Writing Center, and there are people who can help them with the structure of their report or essay, with the language. So knowing that there is a space where you can go to actually receive help is very important, but not just knowing that there is this space. It's also understanding that it might be different from how you're used to viewing these spaces. So for instance, for me in the past, I might have considered shameful to go to a writing space. And I do know that some students might feel that if I need help, maybe there is something wrong with me. So we really do spend the time to try and get this message across that no, it's actually these resources are here for you to help you reach your full potential. So writing space, but also mental health help if students need, and all these different spaces that will help them achieve their full potential. And then something that you said, if you were to advise a fellow coordinator, I believe another important thing to do is to actually try and foster the independence of the students through materials, because they will have to become more independent in this higher education environment. So this can be done through more incorporation of more, let's say, research-based projects in the materials, self-assessment, opportunities for reflection, and so on. And now you asked about the 4 skills. For reading, for instance, use of authentic materials is important, as I said, so journal articles, but the activities that you create have to help students how to deal with this. Journal articles where they might have several unknown words, they are not used to reading such long text, so incorporation of activities that will help them with skimming, scanning, critical analysis of these texts. When it comes to writing, we include materials that will first introduce students to the different genres, but then also the structure of essays and reports. So knowing in the first place that there are different structures depending on what you have to produce, argumentation, so building arguments, activities that help students improve this. Referencing is also very important. When it comes to listening, what we do is we try to include materials that come from either recorded lectures, or we do incorporate live lectures where students have to attend and actually see how a lecture is going to be. Listening to podcasts like your podcast, for example. And then again, this has to be linked with listening strategies. So when it comes to note-taking, you don't need to write everything down, but keeping track of what has been said is important. With speaking, we do, for instance, in our online 5-week online course, we have a seminar every Friday. So students attend a lecture on Thursday, and then they prepare for the seminar on Friday, which actually reflects what happens at university. So they first attend the lecture, they prepare for the lecture, they read articles, and then based on the materials of the lecture, they have to prepare for the seminar, where they either further reflect, depending on which department, further reflect on the content of the lecture. They might apply some of the knowledge they've learned, and so on.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's very
absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering.
That's Kevin.
So I was just wondering, when you say I think the first thing you said was about reading an unknown vocabulary. Could you give an example of how you could actually deal? Because if I imagine, if you're from a country that has English as a second language, or potentially not much English, and then you're coming to the UK to study nanoscience or nanophysics, I could imagine the language barrier to both the English language as well as texts on nanophysics is quite huge. So how can we deal with that? What type of tasks or exercises, what approaches can we actually take to deal with students being exposed to texts that have a lot of unknown, highly specialist vocabulary in them?
That's a really good question, Kevin, and I believe there are several ways to approach this. Now, one thing would be to practice some of the strategies, reading strategies. So first is understanding the overall text. So you can practice either, you can have students first look at the abstract and the conclusion and try to understand what the overall article is about. So using strategies here. Then, since we talked about AI and use of AI, here comes the use of AI tools, where you can ask the AI tool to actually extract specialized vocabulary and explain this vocabulary in plain, in more informal English. So this is something else that they can do. Another thing is having a checklist of questions where students try to see whether they understand these questions and build on that. Then you can have students work in the actual classroom, work in pairs where they discuss their understanding of the text. Then you can also have them specific activities that are about the specialized vocabulary, since they are really going to need to build this and understand the specialized vocabulary that is related to their discipline. So there are several different ways to actually approach this, and it takes time. We've all felt overwhelmed. We've all felt overwhelmed when we first, I think, or at least me, but I do feel that it's everybody. Even if your English is perfect, reading an academic text is challenging, because academic English is different to just like English. It is I've heard people saying academic English is actually a different English. And yes, it is different English because it has its own vocabulary, norms, and so on. So this is another part that we do try to address through EAP, of course.
Okay, thank you. This is super interesting. And that actually leads me to what I think is my very last question. You said English or English for academic purposes is its own language, okay? And in your experience, what do you think is the most valuable and equally most difficult skill that students in an EAP course have to acquire before you could send them off and say, yes, you're ready to study your future degree program? And also, how can you help them acquire these skills, if that makes sense? That question doesn't make sense, tell me. I try to rephrase.
No, it does. So I think I will give an unpopular opinion here. And
Okay. We
um,
can always cut this out.
no. No, I would say that the most important skill for me is actually working on time management and improving your time management skills. And I do say this because being a student in a higher education context requires a lot of independent study. And yes, students do have deadlines, but it's very different to going to school where your teacher tells you every day what you need to do for the next day. It's not guided. So if somebody wants to be successful, they will have to learn how to manage this and break deadlines into smaller parts and work towards their goal. Now, obviously, there are several ways that you can include in your. There are several different activities you can include in your materials to help students with time management, which could include, for example, say having them to write what they are going to achieve, what they want to achieve in the next week, and then reflect on how they believe they can achieve this, and so on. So I believe that this is something that we should be focusing on more in EAP in general, of course, alongside all the other skills, transferable skills like critical reading and so on. And then something else which is not necessarily a skill in itself, but I do think is important, is helping students actually becoming better at understanding the academic expectations, understanding their assignments, because I've seen at Lancaster that there are students who are actually very good, very hardworking, but when they submit their assignments, they are off topic. And this is probably because they didn't understand the assignment brief in the first place. So working on understanding the expectations of your lecturers, of the assignment is something very, very important. So what we do in our courses, we have activities where we break down questions and we reflect on the different uses of, for example, the words that are included in the brief. Evaluate is different from compare, from discuss. So this is something that we include in the materials. Then another thing you can do to practice this is incorporate academic scenarios, such as timed reading, for instance, again, where you ask students to discuss a specific topic, come up with a solution, and so on. So time management is the first one, but then also being aware of academic expectations.
Yeah, I think
so. It seems to be dealing, like EAP seems to be dealing a lot with meta language as well. What do we expect? What do lecturers expect? What do what does the university expect? What do we mean by the words that we use?
Yes, because since you're enrolling university in your degree, everything becomes a bit more nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
This nuance requires a deeper level of understanding the differences
Mm-hmm.
between all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are maybe two things that I would like to mention. The first one is like, yeah, time management. I mean, probably not just being given a deadline, but also how to actually, being able to complete an assignment in, let's say, on time, which is something that students struggles. Even like I would say in the experience of Chile, where people like, in my experience here, we're taught more to like to maybe give presentations, but when people need to write, struggle. For example, that's something that in my experience happens for when they need to take an English proficiency test like IELTS, where people really struggle with, like, if you see like the great writing is the one that you people really struggle there. When speaking, maybe it's a little higher, but I think something that because I mean, when you talked about the writing center, I think that's something that I'm going to take that from this conversation with you, Evelyn, and also the idea of time management. Because, for example, I don't know, a student may have month to complete something, which might seem like a lot of time, but sometimes we other have maybe other assignments. So I think that's also something that we need to consider, Kevin, when it comes to like teaching.
Yes. So it's one thing that you just mentioned, Jose, and that kind of chimes in with what Evelyn said before that I find really interesting. Most students who come to the UK, international students, they are very much experienced with the expectations they have on the IELTS writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, is there any comments you can make on that, Evelyn? An IELTS essay, how may this differ? What are the challenges from students being used to preparing for an IELTS? Something like, what's your favorite pet and why? To discuss the advantages of, I don't know, radiotherapy over chemotherapy.
Yes, thank you.
Challenging question, I think.
It is a challenging question, but it is also something that we have to deal with. Yes, and you're totally right, Kevin, and I do believe that you're speaking from experience here.
Very much so.
Yes. Many of the students that come, myself included here, because I also had to pass the IELTS exam, is you again for the IELTS you need very specific skills apart from the language proficiency. So again, what I try to do through materials design, but also when I am teaching, I expose the students to have them compare an IELTS an IELTS essay with an academic journal article where we identify the differences, which are not just in terms of vocabulary, but also the structure is very different. One is very short, the other is not so short. And also the aim, again, is different. So trying to help students understand that yes, what you learned is very valuable. So structuring your essay, knowing that you have to begin with a topic sentence. Yes, we keep that. We keep the topic sentence, we use it, but in a slightly different way. And then apart from having a topic sentence, you learn how to also combine different arguments. So I believe it's important not to tell students, oh, everything you've learned, now forget it. No, try to use and build on this knowledge to actually help them understand that we build on everything we know. It's just slightly different, and you need to develop now new skills for this new environment. IELTS was really helpful for the stage before this one.
Thank you very much for that.
Evelyn, thank you very much for being such a great guest today. I know that this is like relaunching our podcast, so you were the first option. You were the chosen one for this one. So thank you very much for sharing, let's say, your expertise and your insights. Is there anything else you would like to share? Maybe, I don't know, experience or maybe a piece of advice, some final remarks?
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great pleasure to be here with the two of you today. Something else that I would like to mention. Yes, I think that the last thing that I'd like to mention is that it is, I believe, important to in EAP and tutors, coordinators who are involved in EAP to not just focus on differences, because we do tend to do that. So, oh, you came from this culture and this different environment. Here it's very different. Yes, it is, but there are a lot of similarities, and we need to make this element more prominent, and how we are similar, how the goals of the students are similar. They all want to succeed, and if we do that, I believe we create stronger communities as well, and we motivate each other more. So instead of just focusing on these differences, let's also see how we are similar, and as people as well, not just as students, as tutors, but as people as well. So that's
Yeah, that's something.
last
I mean,
thing,
this is
perhaps.
the spirit of a podcast like this, because sometimes we might think that, for example, in Chile we have some issues, but probably we're gonna find like same problems or maybe some similarities as well, like in different countries. So that's why this is the idea of this podcast. So, Evelyn, thank you very much again. And with this, we conclude our today's episode of ELT in Chile podcast with Dr. Evelin Nikolova from Lancaster University AP program. So if you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at podcast@eltinchile.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also find us on YouTube, now on Blue Sky. And also we have our own website, which is www.eltinchile.com. So Kevin, thank you very much. And Evelyn, thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much.